My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Our guest is attorney Dianne Izzo from North Kingstown. Welcome to State of the State.
Thank you for having me.
In North Kingstown, there is a very historic cemetery dating back to 1851, known as the Elm Grove Cemetery. And this cemetery contains several different important historical artifacts. One is there is a governor buried there. And number two, there is an obelisk that is a dedication to all of the Grand Army of the Republic lodges that existed after the Civil War. So it's kind of the state central monument to the Civil War veterans. And that cemetery fell on hard times. I'll use that term. And I'd like to ask Attorney Izzo to please explain what went on in this whole thing recently.
Well, the cemetery at 960 Tower Hill Road in North Kingstown has been there obviously for over 100 years, 150-ish years, 75. Anyway, not good with those numbers. 44-acre cemetery, very large, and it's owned by a company, a corporation, the Elm Grove Cemetery Company Incorporated, which by charter is owned by all of the plot owners. So it's a very democratically organized organization. And like many democracies, it requires being tended. So over the years, it had a board of directors. It had many years of good record keeping and a steady flow of income as it was selling plots, which is how most cemeteries make most of their money. There's the income from a cemetery is sales of the land and then opening and closing of the graves when a person is to be buried. So over the years, they did develop a perpetual care fund, which came into being about 1906, I believe. And because one of their founders was a banker, I'm still finding out these things. It's a digging process. But he, I believe, opened trust accounts for individual owners. Oh. And when you consider that there are, this book, for example, has about 11,000 markers documented. That's a lot of accounts. So I think it just became unwieldy. I believe that it should have just, I believe the way most of them are handled now is one account and interest bearing and invested and into perpetuity. But when we arrived on scene, when things had gotten very difficult, the total balance in the account was just over $3,000. So yeah, it was pretty frightening. We later found a CD with $7,000, which was the last vestige of any perpetual care fund. Now, I then, I began to become acquainted with it when the librarian of the North Kingstown Free Library said she had difficulty getting hold of the caretaker there. And in my law practice, I always gravitated toward people in trouble. And I could tell he was in some trouble. So I went over, I thought, well, I can look into getting some graves for myself, and because I don't have any, and have a quiet place to go hang out when the leaf blowers are driving me crazy in my neighborhood, frankly. And so I found out many things since then, including that that is not the purpose of having a grave. You can only use it to bury people in. And in the process of doing that, I met the caretaker, who was quite ill. He did show me around, but it was clear that he wanted not to do that anymore. He wanted to retire and have some relief from that position. And he had, for many years, been somewhat reclusive, didn't always answer the phone, and getting to him was mostly through the kind offices of a funeral director named Andrew Correa at the Cranston Murphy funeral home in Wickford. So bottom line, that's how I was introduced to them and saw that there was a very good reason for the long, slow decline that took place over probably since the mid-70s.
The caretaker was in his 70s when this started, right?
Yes, he's now, I believe, 75.
But was he a full-time employee of the cemetery?
Well, it was a model that also went back many years to have a live-in caretaker in a house. So on the premises, in addition to the cemetery, there is a very large barn in very poor condition, and the caretaker's home, which it was the duty of the board of directors to maintain. And it just fell into disrepair as the funds dwindled. And all of those things became the perfect storm.
Well, if there was a board of directors, what did they do when they realized didn't have enough money to maintain the property?
I can only speculate that was the reason the last two professional gentlemen got off, was that they didn't see any way forward. And what happened was that after the professionals left the board, around in the 70s, I believe it was, the caretaker and his family became the board. It was the gentleman who spent his life there, Charles Lafreniere, and his wife Verna, her mother, his mother-in-law, Phyllis Oatley from the famous Oatley's restaurant, and Charlie's older brother, who was a Vietnam veteran, Bernie. So those four took over, and they did the best that they could. There was a time when there was a large payroll, but by the time they were on board as a board, there was no more. I don't believe that they received a pay, but it was very modest, and they worked other jobs. So, for example, Charlie was a cook at Oatley's.
Oh, but so who are people still being buried there?
Well, this is this fascinating situation. And the thing that gave me hope for Elm Grove was that it's not completely dead. It is historical, and the historical part has many people that I believe do not have living family members anymore to come tend their graves. Mm-hmm. But there's also a pretty good sized contingent of people who do visit and tend graves and have people there and have family plots where they may have bought a plot that had 12 graves in it. And maybe they've used them all and maybe they haven't. So in being, one thing, when you get a lawyer involved, there's going to be some research, there's, things like that. And we try to educate ourselves in a short amount of time as fast as we can. Mm-hmm. So I found the New England Cemetery Association, a very active group for 122 years, that is having its convention in Providence in a couple of weeks, in June. Yes, it's great. They're bringing all of New England cemetery associations to Providence. So these are the business people. These are the ones who have the active and going concerns, and like Swan Point, mm-hmm. like Woodnessett. Mm-hmm. Then we have your historical burial grounds, and this is a book about, I don't know if you're going to.
No, that's okay. Sorry. I just wanted to see if there was a glare. So yeah.
Preservation guidelines for municipally owned historic burial grounds and cemeteries. Mm-hmm. So it has many guidelines and useful information about the historic side. So my interest came from historic preservation as well as from personal interest in having grave sites there. And learning, as you were just mentioning, about the Grand Army of the Republic Monument and the many people who are famous and interesting that are there, including about 800 or 900 veterans of mm-hmm. every conflict.
Sure.
It's just, the more you get into it, the more interesting it is, and the more you want to help and help for the future take care of all those very important people.
Was there any approach to the town of North Kingstown to take over the responsibility for the cemetery?
Well, I have had many conversations about that with Ralph Mollis, our town manager, who we were so lucky to have, who is a former Secretary of State, as you know. And he had been inundated with complaints. Mostly, the complaints tend to be about the cosmetics, what I consider the cosmetics, what it looks like, yeah. whether it needs mowing, what people are doing for their decorations on graves and flagging at Memorial Day and things like that. He had no capacity to help them, though, because it's a private nonprofit corporation. Okay. The strange thing about it being a private nonprofit corporation is that it dates back so far. It dates before the IRS was conceived.
Yeah,
and this is a group that never got a 501 designation.
That was my next question.
No, so we have to apply, but we have to have 3 years of good bookkeeping. So I don't know if you know any good accountants that could help us out, but we need some serious help in that department.
Well, let me just back up for a second. Are there records that are fairly current, or do you have any idea what the financial situation is? When I say you, I mean people looking into this?
The new board of directors has a treasurer who, he and I went to the bank to find those accounts that still existed. And since that point, yes, we have fine records. That starts in January of 2024. Mm-hmm. So, and we have a federal ID number. So in order to convert that into the 501 process, they're looking for 3 years of good bookkeeping. And that would be a forensic recreation or a wait 3 years and go forward with good books. I'm not sure what we're going to do, but that's where we started thinking about having a friends group, because that is a model that has worked very well in North Kingstown at the library and also at the senior center, where you have a government entity next to a private nonprofit that does fundraising and provides support. So, and monitors volunteers. I can't tell you how many things I have volunteered for in my life, and I have one of those things on magnets on the refrigerator that says, just say no, you know. But you get involved and you start to care and you meet the people, and you can't turn your back. So many people have already stepped forward to help us, and I feel very strong that a volunteer organization doesn't have to, people don't have to have family members there. They can just be interested in the historic preservation part of it. Yeah. Will help us out.
Does the state of Rhode Island recognize the corporation as a nonprofit corporation?
It was formed by the General Assembly.
Okay, so
the charter.
It is recognized.
That it is a chartered nonprofit from the beginning.
Yeah.
Now they have a kind of a record of having probably as many rejections for non-failure of filing the annual reports as you can possibly have. I think every Secretary of State did send them a letter at one point or another, but it's been restored to good standing. You file your annual reports and you can get back into good standing. That was the first thing I did. I was like, oh, this is easy. I can do I've done this for lots of clients. But oh no, it was only the tip of the iceberg.
Well, fortunately, the Secretary of State is a former history teacher, I think, at East Providence High School. He's been on the program before, so he would certainly be sympathetic.
Greg Amore?
Yes.
Oh, and East Providence has been having a lot of success with historic restoration of their cemetery, the Newman Cemetery. See how much I've learned?
I think that, well, I was remembering, there's everywhere you go in Rhode Island, there's family plots, and there's a sign, Rhode Island Historical Cemetery. So it has to be a registry of all of these, and I would assume that Elm Grove is a designated historical cemetery, is it not?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Well, you know, we have the Rhode Island Historical Cemetery Association, and they have a wonderful database that scared the heck out of me when I first found it, because first of all, Rhode Island has over 3,000 documented historical cemeteries. 3,000. Yeah. So you can look up your town. So I looked up North Kingstown. I was like, oh, maybe 40, 50. Oh, no. It's like 300.
Yeah.
It's astounding, because every farm was allowed to have its own cemetery, and they'd have a separate one for their servant class or people who were enslaved or not. And they're still being discovered. The site has how to report when you find one. Yeah. So they're still adding. It's like, okay.
I was hiking in the Big River Reservoir area one time, and I came upon a cemetery, which I know has been recorded because there's actually a Revolutionary War veteran buried there, and there was a flag. And the flag was in kind of bad shape, so I replaced it. But I know
but someone found it at one time.
Yeah, yeah.
Before you leave that subject, though, at yesterday's concluding ceremonies of the parade at Elm Grove, there was a gentleman there from that organization of the Union
Veterans.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And he reminded me that one of the names is C.C. Baker on the monument. Charlie Baker. And he was the first Rhode Island soldier
killed in action
in the Civil War. Yeah. He's buried there in Elm Grove.
Yep. I'm a docent at the Varnum Armory Museum, so we have an actual linotype of him.
Really?
Yeah, and a discussion the family talked about. You know, he's buried actually in a mass grave. They never recovered him. Oh,
well, there's a monument for him with his name on it.
Yeah, they put I'm sure it's a memorial with no remains.
See there?
So the records that I found, and again, this is an interesting subject to get involved in, say the cemetery was founded in 1851, and several of these family cemeteries, these plots, about 30 of them actually moved, and there's actually a list of the families on this website that I looked at who were moved there. However, this website, I can't remember what organization had it, said that there are no records before 1912 for the cemetery, which would be a 60-year period. Can you address that?
Well, the situation with records is still a little bit up in the air. I mean, what we have we have this book, the Cemetery Inscriptions, that was compiled by a woman named Althea McAleer, who I met at St. Paul's Episcopal Church. She went there for many years and did this tabulation with records from the records kept by the Mormon Church in Utah.
Imagine that.
Yeah, and so before Find a Grave, the Mormons were into genealogy in a big way. And so, but it's based on monuments. So I know that she has listed names of people on monuments in this directory, and many of them, I believe, are in the database for Find a Grave online. As far as records owned by Elm Grove Company, when the house was, when Mr. Lafreniere went into the hospital, the house was briefly condemned, but it needed a clean out, and all of the records were piled into bins for me and came to my dining room. And I went through them, cleaned them, put them into clean bins, and for a while they were at the library until the library decided that didn't really fit with the South County collection. So they're now back in our possession, and the board members are going through them. So there are interment logs, there's perpetual care logs, there's minutes of the corporation meeting.
What do you know?
Oh, it's fascinating stuff, but there's a ton of it. And so, you know, I certainly haven't read all of it. I think that would be some, you know, some good fun for a volunteer group who likes that kind of thing.
Intern from URI as a history major.
Exactly. There's plenty of history to be dug up there. So I can't say for certain if there is a gap like that. I don't think so, but maybe there's missing books.
So it's really
hard to say.
I take from your comments that there's no way to contact all the descendants of people who are interred there.
What a challenge. You know, they can contact us easier than we can contact them. In the 1906, when they invented the perpetual care, they had a little booklet that listed all of the members of the corporation, and I think it was, you know, maybe 100, something like that. So, you know, I don't think they conceived of the growth they were going to be having. We would love to have a directory, at least of people who are want to be actively involved. And so far, all we've done, we've had an annual meeting, we advertised it, we did all the legal things you need to do about posting notices around, and we had a turnout of about 30 people.
Oh.
But on Facebook, there's been interest from hundreds of people. So I don't know if they just don't want to be contacted. They're probably, maybe they don't want to give money, maybe they do, I don't know. That's all for the future of us trying to figure out how to communicate with people who have an interest, who have an ownership interest in the corporation.
So there is a new board of directors.
Oh, yes.
Who is on it now?
We have, the president is a man named Tim Strickland who lives in Exeter and has a auto mechanic business, but he also worked for a time at the Veterans Cemetery. And our vice president is Judy.
How quickly you forget, that's okay.
But I mean, don't make me run through everybody's name.
No.
We have five people.
5 people,
yes.
Including yourself?
No, I'm not. I'm general counsel. I'm not a board member.
Right. Okay.
Trying to.
So there are 5 new. A new board has been created with 5 members.
Yes, and
okay.
and also Ralph Mollis, because the town is the largest plot owner because they own the Potter's Field.
I was just going to get to you about that.
Yes.
I noticed on whatever website I was on, it showed they had the layout of, and there was, I say Potter's Field.
Yes.
Who knows who's buried there? I mean, that was really.
Well, some burial cards do record people there.
Wow.
Yes. So it's not none. It may not be all, but we have some.
Well, how about, are you selling sites? Are there any lots available?
This has been a little bit of an issue in which I've tried to put on the brakes because I am concerned for the lack of a map to show the unmarked graves. What I don't want to have happen is any selling of a plot twice or an occupied plot. We have land that's not developed, but it's heavily treed, and that's very expensive to clear.
Yes.
And it may be in a ravine or in a wet area. So, so there will be some areas. Some of the most prime areas for new sales are in the area that was around the caretaker's house that was kept for a lawn before, and for some buffer. So we know there will be, but can I say that there's room or sales right now, there's a little bit of a pause going on.
Yeah.
If there are burials going on, because
I was just going to ask you there.
if people can document that they have a family plot and room in it through a process called probing, which is what sounds like you stick a stick in the ground and see if there's
I hear clink.
yes, occupied, or if someone's home or not.
Unfortunately, if they were buried in a pine box, you're not going to find anything.
No, but the more recent ones have been in some type of a container line or something like that. They have many different kinds of ways to protect them.
Yeah.
But yes, that was invented so that the land wouldn't cave in. And as you walk around the cemetery, you can see caved in.
Which I've done. And
yes,
I know some of the stones are the real old ones that you can't even really read. Maybe you'll see a date or a little outline of a name or whatever. It's very difficult.
There are so many considerations that have to be dealt with. For example, that the people who are buried there and their families own that stone, and we really don't have the right to touch it, to make a rubbing or to clean it without their permission.
Right.
But when you see ones that have been left alone for many decades, I feel like there's an exception that can be made for some of these to just clean them so you can read them.
Would you be able to, do you think you might need a court order to say that in case somebody comes along and in the last minute?
I don't know what basis a court would have to give you that authority.
Just a thought that I had.
Yeah.
That, you know,
what I guess cemeteries do is create their guidelines, and so that notice is important. So if you tell people in advance, if you neglect your grave at some point, we may take steps.
Yeah.
That also goes for the decorations. I think a lot of cemeteries have said, if you don't clean up your decorations, we're going to come take them away.
If the caretaker, I assume, has retired, or who's doing the opening and closing of graves?
Well, that's by individual contract on an as-needed basis at the moment.
Okay, so if I had a lot there, I would arrange with another company.
The funeral home generally
through the funeral home, sure.
Generally lets us know that an event has happened, and then we seek the services that are needed.
May sound morbid to people, but guess what? Nobody gets out of life alive, and so this is a very fascinating topic, because all of a sudden to have a family realize that the place where their loved ones are buried has fallen into disrepair. And you see some of these old cemeteries. There was one not far from where I lived that was all totally overgrown until a young man who was going for his Eagle Scout took it upon himself. And they did find graves of Revolutionary War veterans in here.
Wow.
That they could still read the stone. And now I saw a group, I don't know who they were, but they did some cleanup, and a gentleman who lives across the street, apparently when he mows his lawn, he goes over there and mows. So I don't know if he's getting paid or what, or who's paying him. Because
you see these all over Rhode Island. There's on Post Road, right by the bank, there's one.
Yes.
And it's being maintained, I think, by the bank.
Well, strangely enough, I noticed in North Kingstown on Post Road, where Frenchtown Road intersects, which is Route 402, there was an elevated area where they actually cleared it because they were doing some work, and guess what they found? There's a cemetery up there.
Wow.
And it's kind of overgrown now, because obviously people would have to go across the highway to get to it to do it. But so you never know where they are. So are there any fundraising efforts underway now? You were talking about Friends Associations.
We're just starting. We're just starting to put that new Friends board together. So
if someone were to donate to an effort, would that be tax deductible without a 501c3? Since
not until, no.
Okay.
But when you are incorporating a new group, the process is quicker.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say how fast it is, and I have no idea what's going to happen at the IRS this year. But we hope that the new group will get through faster.
Yeah, so, all right.
Get that certification.
Is the caretaker's home going to be demolished in a barn, or you said it was in bad shape?
That is definitely one of the projects for the Building and Grounds Committee to bring forward some ideas to the board. And we've had people who say, oh, this can be fixed, and other people who say, whoa, it would cost too much The cost of a restoration of the house would be more than a new one would cost. It's the old problem of historic restoration. The same with the barn. I mean, people have said, oh, you got to stabilize it. It's like you can.
For what?
It rains inside there.
I mean, you're not going to have a situation where you'd have a resident caretaker anymore, right?
I don't think that model is going to be very useful, no. Not with the volume of work that there is there. I mean, it is, I would say 90% in the historic category and maybe 10% in the active.
And you, what do you say, have 44 acres? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
But yet to get someone to be, quote, a caretaker, just to mow and maintain the old type of cemetery with a lot of raised stones around the family plots and stuff, it's very time consuming.
Well, and expensive. Some years ago, a company came in just to do a cleanup before, I believe it was before Memorial Day, and the estimate was 5 days of, was it 6 men, 40 hours? And the cost was $6,000.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, so when you come into an account that has $3,000 in it, you can start to understand why.
Yeah. You know. It is a sad thing because so many of these historic places, whether it's the cemetery or whatever, they're not properly funded, and people want to keep them, but the cost of upkeep is just skyrocketing.
Well, that's why I believe that a corps of dedicated volunteers of all ages, your scouts or people, because mowing is not a very skilled. You have to have the right attitude to be in a cemetery. You have to be respectful. You have to understand that people don't want to hear mowing every day. It's a quiet place. It's a respectful place. It's a sacred place. And it's not the place for loud talking or music or gatherings. So that's why I believe some cemeteries don't mow very often, and they adopt a natural landscape effect. But there are these styles.
Has to be maintained.
These books about there was this one fellow from Chicago, David Charles Sloan, has written. This book is A Cemetery Dead, and a lot of people think that the whole concept of cemetery is dead. And before that, he wrote The Last Great Necessity, which is a very good survey of the history of cemetery design, the idea that it should have wandering paths and not be these rows of rigid, row on row. Yeah. But we have all kinds of cemeteries. Yeah. And the more natural ones, sometimes new cemeteries are being designed that don't have any stones at all. So they're a meadow, and you scatter cremated
remains. Go to the Veteran Cemetery in Exeter. There's no above ground stones allowed.
Oh, they're all flat, but they do have the names there.
Yes, they do.
They do.
Yeah, that way when the mowers go by, they just keep going.
Right, it's very efficient. Some of the Catholic cemeteries are that way as well.
Yeah.
But even the flat stones, they sink. So there's always going to be some maintenance to do. We
have about a minute left. One thing I wanted to explore with you as an attorney, first of all, talking about volunteers doing work, what about liability if somebody gets hurt while they're working on, like you have to say Boy Scout?
Oh, I thought you were going to say, why would any lawyer in their right mind get involved in this project?
Well, I didn't want to get quite there yet, but what about that?
There's different kinds of protections. Historic cemeteries are protected by law for their volunteers. Boards of directors have a protection of immunity. We have a release form we ask people to sign who are going to work in the cemetery. Okay. And the descendants of the Union Army have an insurance policy.
Pleased that you came in to talk to us about this, and I hope people realize that these historic cemeteries, as you said, there's thousands of them all around the state. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been very fun.
Good, thank you. And thank you for joining us on State of the State.